Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nick Pettis with Cynthia Carrillo and Professor. How do
Bahareh
you?
Alaei.
Thank you. And we're doing a women's suffrage interview. So, Professor, we're going to ask you a few questions, Cynthia and I, and if you can answer them the best you can, that'll be great.
Absolutely.
Question number one: being a woman in America, how does it feel to have a say in who runs your government?
I would say it feels about as good as it does for anyone who feels like their voice is being heard, that they're being represented. I think it's a very human desire to want to be heard. um, though I'm not sure that as a woman I am being fully represented in our current political structure. So I think it's gotten better, but I don't think that I'm being fully represented.
Okay. Did you know that over 100 years ago, it was a crime to vote as a woman in America?
I did. Um, and it's been less than that if you were a woman of color. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Michelle Weber actually touched on that in our interview beforehand.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
actually pretty cool.
Yeah. I think it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of, what was it, 1965? When
64, 65, around that time.
yeah, when women of color were given. Um, and so I think, and that's kind of where the terminology gets a little bit problematic, right? Because we tend to say it was 1920 women gained the right to vote, but that's not accurate, right?
Ex-
Because it's by its very nature, it's including a huge segment of the population, and so some women gain the right to vote would be a lot more accurate.
Definitely. Knowing what you know about the women who came before you did to earn the right to vote, if you could say anything to the women viewing this series, what would you tell them about voting?
About voting, I would say that um, so I have to give you a little bit of background as I wasn't actually born in the United States. I was born in Iran. And so we underwent a religious revolution. And so women are given the right to vote, right? But it's not exactly like full rights to vote as, which obviously in the United States, it's a very different, it's a very different point of access than it is and than from where I came from. And I think that it's an incredibly important and undervalued, frankly, fundamental aspect. I know that, for instance, your age bracket is immensely powerful, but when it comes to voting time, a lot of folks don't show up. Right. And so, and I'm not sure why. I mean, obviously, you should probably speak to one of our political science professors who would have much deeper insight to this than I possibly could ever give you. But that representation is incredibly important, and it's necessary to ensure that we're engaging with the process, not just at the national level, but at the local level as well, to make sure that our interests are being kept into account. And I think again, a lot of folks really focus on the national election, but what's happening in your community, what's happening with your school board, what's happening with your mayor in your town. That's a part of it. Another thing that I would say is that I think we're under a very false assumption that those rights are always going to be here. And that's the other piece of coming from a country where those rights can be taken away. And there are people today who are actively working right now towards dismantling access to voting for underrepresented folks, for minorities, and for the women who are, frankly, the most invisible in our society. So I would say to those who are voting that it's important to vote for our interests and to be activists in making sure that the voices of others are being represented as well.
I have just one more question. How does it feel to have a woman be our vice president of the United States? How does that make you feel?
Um, you just said that and it gave me chills. Because Kamala Harris, she's a Southeast Asian woman and she's an auntie to, certain communities. And so, um, again, representation is pivotal. Representation matters. And so when you have my daughter and she sees somebody who looks like her mama, you know, in that position, it makes a difference, right? And so for me, I'm just immensely happy for all those, for all the little girls and all the little boys who see, right, who see women and everybody, right, who see women in these positions and understand that it's a very natural place for women like Kamala Harris to be. I'm hoping one day we'll finally get a female president, especially a female president of color would be ideal. Um, and then at another level, it's a little bit bittersweet for me because we're a leading industrialized nation and we're one of the last to elect a female into such a high position of power. And frankly, so many other countries have already voted women as president, and we're not there yet. But it just means we've got some more work to do. But it's nice to see her in that position and to know that it's going to have an impact on future generations.
Definitely. And I look forward to seeing Vice President Kamala Harris and President Biden's work in this term.
Me too. I'm hoping that some of the the promises obviously are they're going to continue serving the communities that they rallied to vote them into office. And so not forget that those are the communities who turned out. I'm looking at you, Georgia. Right? Like those are the people, right, who put them there, and they need to remember that and make sure that they're serving the interests of those people that they made some really big promises to.
I agree. Cynthia, did you have anything you want to add?
So what are some opinions and thoughts that you might have about women's suffrage?
Like, broadly speaking, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. It was good. We have work to do.
I agree.
Okay.
So, how has your life been impacted by having a voice regarding this topic? Do you like having a voice in this matter?
Of course. Right? Who would not want to have their voice represented again? I think one of the most devastating things you can do to someone is to make them invisible, right? And essentially, when you take away people's ability to represent their interests, you're making them invisible, and that just speaks to the fact that it's like saying you don't matter in our society, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I want that, and I want that expanded. I want a louder voice.
I mean, you're right. Every woman wants a louder voice. So. And lastly, for me, with everything going on in politics today, what if the 19th Amendment changed, allowing women to no longer have a voice? How would you feel about that?
Invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where it's changed for me since I became a mother. And it kind of extends to how I feel about all my students too, right? Because the students that I see in my classroom, when I look at my daughter, I'm not just looking at my daughter, I'm not just looking at my students, I'm looking at our society, I'm looking at our culture, I'm looking at the people who are going to forge my community, right? Y'all are the ones who need to take care of the messes that we're making and to try to kind of work toward that. And so it would be devastating. It would be, I don't think I could face my daughter or my students. I don't think I could if we allowed that to happen, you know? And I also want to know what went so horribly wrong that allowed that to happen.
A lot of things are changing these days.
They are, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you for meeting with us, Professor. This was great.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time out to chat with us. And I applaud you both for taking this on. I think it's a lovely addition to what our Talon is already doing. And I'm so excited to see what you all do with this and your upcoming projects.